Today, we're about to embark on an extraordinary tale of survival. We've heard countless stories of people surviving with minimal gear, or even none at all. But what about surviving completely naked and barefoot, especially when someone's out to get you? Today, our story is about a truly remarkable individual, John Colter. John Colter was born in 1774 in the Virginia colony. His family is believed to have emigrated from Ireland. We don't know much about his formal education or literacy, but there are two signatures that confirm he could at least write his name, which was quite rare in those days. He was a blue-eyed, incredibly strong man, standing at 6 feet tall, which was considered very tall for that time. It is known that in his youth, John served as a ranger. Unfortunately, there's not much more information about his early life. A turning point in his life was his participation in the Lewis and Clark expedition. The Lewis and Clark expedition was the first American expedition to cross the western portion of the United States. Its primary goal was to explore the land from the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean. The expedition was tasked with studying the native tribes, flora, fauna, and geology of the region, as well as assessing the presence of British and Canadian trappers. President Jefferson also instructed Lewis to find navigable rivers to develop trade with the Pacific Ocean. This expedition was crucial both politically and economically. However, the expedition faced numerous challenges, including hunger, cold, bear attacks, diseases, the treacherous Missouri River, and attacks by Native Americans. It was truly a perilous journey that only the most determined individuals would undertake, and John Colter was one of them. By that time, John had already earned a reputation as an excellent marksman and a skilled hunter. In September 1803, the young man approached Captain Lewis with a proposal to join his expedition. He was officially enlisted in the 1st Regiment of the U.S. Army on October 15, 1803, when the expedition was at the Falls of the Missouri. When he joined the expedition, Colter was 28 years old, and that's about all that's typically written about him, aside from the fact that he was a valuable member of the expedition and that in many ways, it was thanks to him that it was successful. Such is the fate of characters who become folklore. Colter was one of those, a true hero, almost superhuman. However, most of what we know about John Colter comes from the journals of the expedition's leaders. There were only a little over 50 people in the expedition, so they managed to devote enough attention to each member and describe them fairly well. For example, we learn from these journals that Colter was involved in a New Year's Eve drinking spree and was reprimanded for it. But 2 weeks later, Clark apparently trusted him enough to send him to St. Louis with a letter to Lewis. The expedition journal also reveals that Robert Fraser and John Fields faced a court-martial on March 29, 1804. Although the charges and proceedings were not officially recorded, it seems there was some sort of internal disciplinary action within the expedition. The captains were concerned about the growing insubordination among some members of the expedition, particularly towards Sergeant Ord, who was in command during the captain's absences. Clark's journal notes that John Colter loaded his rifle and threatened the sergeant, refusing to follow orders. However, on May 7th, John Colter sent a letter of apology to Clark and Lewis, bringing the matter to a close. However, he was truly a valuable member of the expedition, and in some instances, even a key one. Colter's ability to remain calm in unexpected or threatening situations was well documented. The captain's journals recorded an incident in which, while hunting alone near the expedition's camp, Colter encountered 3 Native Americans who aimed their bows at him. Instead of firing or fleeing, Colter placed his rifle on the ground as a sign of peace. He accompanied the Native Americans to the expedition's camp, where they were fed and given gifts. In gratitude, the Native Americans shared vital information about the region, showing the explorers the best route through the Rocky Mountains, effectively dividing North America into 2 parts. It was thanks to John Colter that the expedition successfully crossed the natural mountain barrier and reached the fertile lands bordering the Pacific Ocean. Another entry in Clark's journal recounts an incident near the beginning of the return journey through the Bitterroot Mountains in mid-June. Colter's horse, along with himself, fell into a swift river and was carried downstream a considerable distance. As a result of the fall, Colter lost his blanket, but was fortunate to sustain only minor injuries. While this incident might seem unremarkable, accidents were common on the expedition. There's a brief detail that reveals a lot about Colter's character. It's noted that as he was swept downstream, he held his rifle above his head. This shows that he was a very resourceful individual who, even in the face of danger, prioritized protecting his weapon. Having meticulously explored the northwestern coastal lands of what would become the United States, in 1806 the expedition turned back mid-year. Their homeward journey led them through a Mandan village where they encountered a remarkable sight, Forrest Hancock and Joseph Dixon. These two men were the first white individuals the expedition had seen since April. As fur trappers, they were bound for the upper reaches of the Missouri River, seeking their fortunes in the bountiful wilderness. By August, John Colter approached his commanding officer with a bold request. He wished to leave the expedition immediately and join Hancock and Dixon. Clark, recognizing the value of Colter's skills, but also understanding his desire for adventure, agreed. Both captains signed the necessary paperwork to discharge Colter, provided no others followed suit. In their journals, they expressed their best wishes for Colter's future endeavors, outfitting him with essential supplies, primarily gunpowder and lead. As Clark later wrote, Colter's departure marked the end of his service with the expedition, but his contributions were duly noted. The captains felt a deep sense of gratitude for all the members who had faithfully served. With that, 3 intrepid hunters set off once more, their journey taking them up the Missouri River and deep into the uncharted wilderness of Yellowstone. Their partnership was short-lived, lasting only 6 weeks. A disagreement arose, and both Hancock and John Colter parted ways with Dixon in spring 1807. Soon after, Colter found himself alone, heading down the Missouri River toward St. Louis. There, he almost immediately joined a new expedition led by the fur trader Manuel Lisa, bound for the Yellowstone River. This was an even more perilous venture. In October, Colter was sent to establish friendly relations and trade with the Crow Nation. Over the harsh winter, with temperatures plunging to 30 to 35 degrees Celsius, he trekked hundreds of miles on snowshoes, carrying a heavy pack, a knife, a tomahawk, a powder horn, and his trusty rifle. The following spring, the expedition moved west up the Yellowstone River. They encountered around 800 Crow Indians and several Flathead natives, all friendly tribes. Together, they headed towards Fort Raymond, only to be attacked by approximately 1,500 Blackfeet warriors. Colter's acquaintance, General Thomas James, wrote that Colter was shot in the leg, but continued to fight from behind a bush. The Crow and Flathead eventually repelled the attack, and Colter returned to Fort Raymond. Interestingly, it's believed that John Colter was the first white man to witness the famous Yellowstone geysers. Upon returning to civilization, he recounted tales of boiling hot water erupting from the ground, only to be met with disbelief and ridicule. Amusingly, the area became known as Colter's Hell. It wasn't until many years later, in 1869, when a scientific expedition led by David Folsom visited the region and witnessed the geysers firsthand, that people finally believed Colter's extraordinary tales. After recovering from his leg wound, Colter and his companion, John Potts, set out to trap beavers in a particularly rich hunting ground they had discovered during their earlier travels. However, there was a major obstacle. These lands were claimed by the hostile Blackfeet Nation. A formidable tribe of over 50,000 people, the Blackfeet were a force to be reckoned with. Known for their distinctive black moccasins, made from rawhide tan to a deep black, they were a fierce and proud people. Trapping beavers in Blackfeet territory was extremely dangerous, but Colter, never one to shy away from a challenge, was determined to take the risk. They hunted cautiously, avoiding the Blackfeet during daylight hours and setting traps at night. This strategy aligned perfectly with the nocturnal habits of beavers. However, during one of their morning rounds, the inevitable happened. They encountered a large war party of Blackfeet. 2 years later, Colter recounted this harrowing tale to John Bradbury, a renowned British naturalist who included it in his travel journal and published it in London in 1817. One early morning, while checking their traps in a creek a few miles from the Jefferson Fork, they heard a loud commotion, like the thunder of many hooves. Unable to see what was causing the disturbance due to the high, steep banks, Colter immediately suspected Indians and urged Potts to retreat. But Potts, dismissing Colter's caution as cowardice, insisted it was only bison. They continued upstream, their doubts quickly dispelled when they rounded a bend to find themselves surrounded by a war party of 600 Indians. Retreat was impossible, so Colter steered the canoe toward shore, hoping to parley. As they approached, an Indian grabbed Potts's rifle. Colter, a powerful man, wrestled the rifle away and handed it to Potts, who was still in the canoe. Potts pushed off and started to paddle away, but was struck by an arrow almost immediately. "Colter, I'm hit," he cried. Colter tried to reason with Potts, urging him to come ashore, but Potts instead raised his rifle and shot the Indian dead. It seemed a mad, suicidal act, but there was a grim logic to it. Knowing the gruesome tortures the Indians were capable of, Potts may have chosen a swift death. As soon as he fired, hundreds of arrows pierced his body. "I could hardly recognize him afterwards," Colter later recalled. The Indians then seized Colter, stripped him naked, and took all his belongings. At first, they intended to use him for target practice, a common torture among the Indians, where a man would be tied to a stake and children and adolescents would practice their archery on him. But the chief, grabbing Colter by the shoulder, asked, "Can you run?" Having lived among the Crow Indians for a time, Colter understood the Blackfeet language and customs. He knew he had to run for his life from 600 armed warriors, so he slyly replied that he was a very poor runner, though in truth, he was the fastest among the trappers. The chief ordered his men to stay put and gave Colter a 400-yard head start, saying, "Save yourself if you can." At that moment, a terrifying war cry erupted behind him. Colter ran with a speed that even surprised himself, heading towards the Jefferson Fork. He crossed a 6-mile plain, dodging the sharp spines of countless cacti. Almost halfway across, he dared to look back and saw that the Indians were scattered, and he had gained a significant distance. But one Indian armed with a spear was only 100 yards behind. Hope surged through Colter as he pushed himself harder, blood pouring from his nose. He was only a mile from the river when he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw the Indian just 20 yards away. Suddenly, Colter stopped, turned, and spread his arms. Startled by the sudden movement and perhaps frightened by Colter's bloody appearance, the Indian stumbled and fell, his spear breaking as he tried to throw it. Colter immediately grabbed the broken shaft of the spear, pinning the Indian to the ground. He then resumed his flight. The pursuing Indians, upon discovering their fallen comrade, roared with fury, but John had already reached the river. Spotting a beaver dam, he ducked beneath it and hid among the sticks and branches. He had barely taken cover when the Indians arrived, their war cries echoing across the prairie. Colter said they howled like demons. They searched the area for the escapee, even inspecting the dam, but found nothing. A particularly dangerous moment arose when one of the Indians suggested setting fire to the dam, but they decided against it. Colter remained underwater near the dam until nightfall when the Indians left. He surfaced and silently swam a considerable distance down the river before climbing ashore and running through the night. Though relieved to have escaped the Indians, Colter's situation was dire. Naked and alone in the prairie under the scorching sun, he was exhausted and his feet were covered in cactus spines. The nearest fort was at least 7 days away. Nevertheless, he survived. After 7 days, he arrived at Fort Lisa. Along the way, he sustained himself by eating the Soralia esculenta, a root highly valued by the Missouri Indians and known as breadroot or Indian bread. It was perhaps one of the most heartbreaking survival stories of the year. Our hero went on to help build another fort in what is now Montana, but the Blackfeet continued to attack hunters and settlers. With no end to the violence, Colter decided to return to civilization and settled in St. Louis. He left the American Northwest in late 1810 after 6 long and dangerous years there. In St. Louis, the mountain man married a woman named Sally, and they had a son named Hiram. The family bought a farm in Missouri and lived a quiet life. However, William Clark, his old commander from the Lewis and Clark expedition, soon appeared and asked Colter to write an account of the lands he had explored since leaving the expedition, information he included in his famous map, making it the most complete map of the region for the next 75 years. On May 7, 1812, John Colter died in his bed from a short illness, probably jaundice. He was only 38 years old. John Colter became a legendary figure in American culture, considered the first mountain man. You can learn more about mountain men in our video about Hugh Glass. He became the subject of many myths and legends, and was featured in numerous books, articles, and westerns, such as Run of the Arrow and Mountain Men 1980.